So today we are having the presentation by Dr. Eric Scherer on the philately and postal history of French India. Dr. Eric Scherer is an avid philatelist and postal historian. He first participated in an exhibition in 1978 and is exhibiting ever since. He concentrates on a few topics, among them the postal history of French India, reply postcards in international mail, and mail postage. He is a member of several clubs and societies like the Royal Philatelic Society London, the India Study Circle, Colfra, France and Colonies Philatelic Society, and the Swiss Society for Postal History. He was named Fellow of the Royal and member of the European Academy of Philately AEP. Sorry. So, Eric, over to you, and thanks for accepting the invitation.
Very happy to be with you today, even though I'm in Switzerland. So many greetings to India. I hope I can come to India soon, maybe this year or beginning of next year. Pratisad asked me to give some insights on French India. So just to start with, how did I end up collecting French India? I started about 16 years ago with French India. I've always been collecting postal history. I originally started with American postal history, did many other topics in between, and I have an extensive collection on international reply cards. And about 20 years ago, I bought a house in France. So I said I have to start with a French topic here. So for me, the starting point was not India, but France. I want to start with a French topic, and then I was looking at all those French colonies, and I said if I want to start with French colony, it should be a rather small one, yeah, with like a foreseeable amount of material. So I've been looking at different websites like eBay, Del Campe, and Philasearch, just trying to understand what material is around, what's its availability. And finally, I ended up with these French establishments in India. At that point, 16 years ago, I was not even aware that there have been French settlements in India. And I think this is still something that most people are not aware of, that actually France had colonies or certain settlements in India for many, many years. Actually, we will see that later. It has been the longest lasting French colony of all. And usually it's not really well known. Among philatelists, it's known, and especially I think among philatelists in India, several of you know the fact that there has been French settlements in India. Still, it remains a little bit of a kind of a terra incognita. And so this is pretty much what I want to do today in the next hour, to have a stroll through the philately and the postal history of the French settlements in India. Since it's kind of a little bit difficult in this virtual setup with Zoom, I will go through my talk, and please write down your questions so that we can have a good discussion in the end. Thanks a lot. So let's see how I get this working. I just want to start a little bit with the historical background, which is kind of important. As you all know, there have been quite a lot of foreign powers trying to colonize India from around the 1500, when the Portuguese started settling in India with what they called the Portuguese state in India. Yeah, the British followed. When the Dutch came, the Danish came, the French came, and most people don't even know that the Belgians and Austrians also had settlements in India. At that time, when the Belgians had settlements, they have not been called Belgians, but they have been called the Austrian Netherlands. But since most people just don't know what the Austrian Netherlands are, it's exactly what is Belgium today. if we look at that, only part of those European nations ever had their own postal services. Yeah, and so if you look at that, some of them issued stamps and had postal services, but if you look like at the Danish, they never had their own postal services. They only had the British and the Belgian, Austrians. So they never had any regular mail service at all. So it remains with the Portuguese, the British, and the French, who really had an extensive mail service and own stamps in India. Just to give you an idea, for most of the time, the European settlements remained to be along the coastlines and along the rivers, as we can see it here. Up here with Calcutta, it's along the river, but all the rest has been along the coastline. So practically all those countries remained and having settlements on the coastline. Yeah, so they never have been really interested to go into India and conquer the country. And the first nation who really did that were the British. Yeah, so it's like there's a big, huge difference between all other countries and the British, because the British were interested to conquer all the country. And also, as you know, the British have been starting to set up infrastructure. Yeah, all the other countries, nations from Europe never really cared too much, and they also never really set up any infrastructure in India, which really includes a domestic postal system. So this is something that you should know, is except the British, all the other countries never ever cared about setting up a domestic postal system. What is important is to understand, if you talk about French India, that French India was part of a colonial empire. Yeah, and this is pretty much what we call the French colonial empire, and we see this here. We have like a first wave of a French colonial empire, which is the Queen one. And then we have a second wave of a colonial empire, which is the blue one. And the blue one is that colonial empire, which is pretty much on our minds and on the minds of philatelists. Yeah, because the blue colonial empire in the end resulted in issuing stamps, while the Queen one was finished more or less with the end of the Napoleonic Wars and never even got into issuing any stamps. If you look at that, we have a rather vast area which was under a certain degree of French control in India, and we have this huge area of North America which was under control of the French. If we look at that, basically the Queen areas became under pressure during what in Europe we call the 7-Year War. Yeah, so there was a huge war in Europe between the French, the British, the Austrians, the Prussians, and many other countries. And basically, the 7-Year War shaped a lot of what is Europe today. Yeah, so we had the 7-Year War, we had World War I, World War II, which shaped Europe. And during the 7-Year War, which was actually called in North America the French-Indian War, not referring to East India, but to the Red Indians, and was called the Carnatic Wars in India, the 7-Year War resulted in the loss of the North American Empire for the French, and also the loss of the huge territory the French had under their control in India. And as a result of that, basically, with the end of the Napoleonic Wars, there was no colonial empire left over. The only part of his former empire which was left over were the 5 settlements in India, and that's rather interesting, which has been Pondicherry, Karikal, Mahe, Yanao, and Chandernagore. And so this makes these 5 settlements the only part of the French first colonial empire which was still existing during the wave of the second colonial empire. Yeah, so this is a fact that most people don't know, and which is rather interesting because it's all part of a huge and international history. Yeah, and so even though these areas in India were rather small after the Napoleonic empires with 5 settlements, they were what would become the oldest and longest lasting French colonies ever. Yeah. If you think about that, we all know that there was like Quebec, which is still French today, but Quebec was lost also in the 7-Year War. It was never changed the language. These other areas, they changed to English, but Quebec remained French. But Quebec never has been part of post-Napoleonic France. So if you look at the 5 settlements in India, we have seen that before. This is like we have 2 facts. One fact is that they are really spread out all over India with several thousand kilometers between north and south and also east and west. Yeah, and if we look at the territory per se, it's like a little bit crazy shaped territory, especially if you look at Pondicherry or Mahe. It's not one continuous territory, but it has been spread out, and everything which is right in between has been under the governance of British India. So if you look at that, just by these geographical factors and by the really minimal size of the colony and this non-consistent territory, you can believe that there was no point that French India would run at all without British consent. Yeah, so it's really important to understand. Yes, French India was part of this huge second French Empire, but it also was, in the end, a territory existing on the benevolence of the British. If you look at French India today, it's rather interesting. As we can see, there is still this certain Frenchness which exists in India. We see this here. There's international. There's a French high school in Pondicherry. We still have street names written in French. We have these memorials by the French which still do exist. Yeah, and also there is this certain feeling of exoticness in France, where still like there's a famous perfume Escalade Pondicherry by Dior, or this brand, you maybe know this, Le Thé de Mariage. It's one of the best tea brands in the world. They have a tea which is called Chandernagore. So there's this still until today in India, in the former French colonies of India, the people have a certain connection to being French, and the French still feel a certain connection to India, even if it's just a superficial exotic connection. Okay, let's start with philately. And one thing that I found important, especially also for jurors, is that we have to start to distinguish between pre-philately and pre-post. Yeah, if I look at many exhibits, they mix up pre-philately and pre-post. Yeah, and as we have seen, French India is a very old region. Like the first mails existing are from the 1680s, 1690s. So it's rather long time, more than 300 years ago. And at that time, until the first opening of British post offices in French India, we talk about the pre-post area. So we have certain items which do exist, and these items have been carried individually without any routes and weights and without any mail schedule. So just to show you a little bit, this is at the moment the earliest known letter in existing, which was written in French India. In this case, rather more interesting, it was written during the Dutch occupation of Pondicherry in 1693, and by the Dutch governor Van Dielen, and he wrote this letter, and it was hand carried to Cochin, which was the Dutch colony in India at that time. And it's a rather interesting piece of history, but it's not really mail per se, because it was a hand carried letter, no weights, no nothing. Here's another one which is also very interesting. This is from 1753, which is right more or less in the middle of the 7-Year War, or at the end of the 7-Year War. And this was written within Pondicherry. It was written from the governor or the governor lieutenant of Pondicherry to a guy on a ship on anchor in Pondicherry Bay. The ship was called Vey Felix, yeah, and it's also very, very old piece of hand-carried mail. Then, around 1770, the French started to introduce a mail system for mail between India and France, and this mail system was used for all French foreign destinations which they sailed with own ships. Yeah, so the ships were owned by the French East India Company. They were not packets, but they were just regular ships, and they were hand carried by the captain of a ship from, in this case, Pondicherry to Lorient. Lorient is the harbor of France until around 1800. So pretty much all mail goes through Lorient, and these letters were, you can understand them by the dateline, in this case Pondicherry, and you can see them by the incoming mark colonies, COL, par Lorient. So French colonies through Lorient. The ship letters were carried from India to France, paying 1 sou, yeah, so that was rather cheap, and the domestic rate from Lorient, in this case, to Vannes, city in France, was 8 sous. So the maritime postage was much, much cheaper than the domestic postage. So let's continue and see what happens next. Yeah, and this is really, really important because it's wrong in most catalogs and all that. Yeah, by the 1770s, as you all know, the British started to open post offices all around India. They started in Calcutta, and then they continued. And by 1784, the first British post office was opened in Chandernagore, and subsequently they continued to open British post office in all settlements except Yanao, yeah, or Yanam in English, yeah. So all mail originating from between 1784 and 1853 are all British. They are not French at all. There has been no French mail service during that time. And I think this is one of the most important things for jurors. If you look at exhibits, but also if you look at auction catalogs, there's a huge mix-up between which mail went through the British Post Office and which mail went through the French Post Office. And it's rather simple. Until 1853, there was no French service at all. No, zero, nothing. Yeah. Except a couple of ship letters, which I will not go into, but all mail went through the British post offices. Yeah. So we can look at these letters, see what happened. This is a letter written in Pondicherry, addressed to Chandernagore, and we can see here the dates. Chandernagore, Pondicherry, Kari, Mahe, they opened post offices here, and even though this is all written in French, it's a piece which went through the British mail. Yeah, so it's like a French guy mailing, a French guy receiving. It's a domestic letter from Pondicherry to Chandernagore, but it's completely gone through the British postal system. We have more of those, and by 1795 until 1837, they introduced a whole set of hand-struck stamps. Yeah, we can see some of those, like this is very famous, the Pondicherry Post paid in an oval, or we have this cartouche Pondicherry Post paid, and we also have this Pondicherry non-paid, or we have this Chandernagore. Yeah, and these cancels are very, very interesting. They are very rare and they are individual. There was no unified rule how these cancels should look like. Yeah. So this is really important. And if you look at Hammond Giles on that period, pretty much if you look at the different towns of India, every town had different cancels. Many towns had no cancel at all. So it's a very, very individualized phase. But what is always interesting is that India has been very, very modern in its postal system at that time, because if you look at European postal history at the same time, most countries did not even use those hand-struck stamps at that time. Yeah, so if you go back and say, okay, I have letters like this one, 1795 from India, Pondicherry postpaid, you can say, wow, this is something the Indians had it, the Europeans did not even have it. Except, of course, the British. The British have been the driver of innovation at that time, and this is, of course, a reason why the Indian post office or British post office in India started to use those things usually like 1 to 3 years after it was introduced in Britain. It was also introduced in India, usually many years before it was introduced anywhere else in Europe or North America. One of the most important dates of British India postal history is the India Post Office Act in 1837, which introduced those boxed stamps. So by this date now we have unified hand-struck stamps. This is a very beautiful one from Karikal, one of the French settlements. This is also a very rare one. It's very hard to find. And these are very, very beautiful stamps. They have been unified, and you can see it has the name. You write in the date by manuscript marking. It says paid. We also have cancels like an oval one, very, very rare. Free and bearing is also very rare. And here is the postal rate of 2 annas. So this is one of the phases where it's really getting interested, where you can do a lot of knowledge. Here I have 2 from Pondicherry, and those who are very detailed can see that in this case, Pondicherry is written with one R, and here it's written with two R's. So basically what happened is the English spelling of Pondicherry is always with two R's, whereas the French spelling is with one R. So in the beginning they introduced a hand stroke marking with the French spelling, and when they realized it's the French spelling, and then they changed it to two R's to the English spelling. Still, this is not a French cancel. Yeah, it's a British cancellation. Yeah, or a British hand struck stamp. Yeah, so this is really, really important to understand that. That has nothing to do with any kind of French postal services. Yeah. So one thing which is very, very interesting and also would be worthwhile topic to collect here, after the first Treaty of Paris and the restoration of French rule in India for the 5 small settlements in 1816, the British granted French officials a free franking privilege. Yeah? And they basically said, we will carry all your mail if it originates from a French official for free if it's domestic mail. And this is the very first letter known from 1816, which went under the French free franking privilege. It was written by the where is he? Comte de Dupay, who was the new governor for the French settlements, and it was not even written in French India, it was written in Madras while he was traveling to French India, and he still already in Madras used his free franking privilege. This free franking privilege remained in existence all until the end of the colony. This one is maybe the most famous free franking privilege letter known from at least French India and probably even from India itself, because it has two of those very, very, very rare oval free hand stamps. Yeah? It's like you can see the box stamp in Geram, that's the place where it was delivered through, because Yanaon didn't have a post office, so it was delivered through the Ingeram post office a couple of miles away, and it was mailed from Pondicherry. And this is also very, very interesting letter because it's addressed to the Prince de Eckmühl. And now we go back into French history. It's like there has been a lot of French nobility, but there has been what they call the Napoleonic nobility. There have been 8 Napoleonic titles which Napoleon, the great emperor, Napoleon Bonaparte, granted, named after his victories. So there was this Battle of Eckmühl, which he won, and then he created that title, Prince de Eckmühl. And these titles continued even after the fall of the Napoleonic Empire. Yeah, but of course, if you only had 8 titles, the number of those title holders were very, very, very small. So this is what makes this letter even more special. I have a very late letter under the free franking privilege here, which was addressed from the government in Pondicherry to the consular services in Bombay or Mumbai. And here we have this free franking privilege marking, and here we have a registration fee, because free franking only covered the postal fee for the letters, but not for extra services. And so this is a very, very nice letter from more or less, in the end, it was mailed during the Second World War. And what is also interesting, we will talk about this later, we have this so-called Cross of Lorraine here and here, and this is the sign of Free France, the de Gaulle government during the Second World War. We will talk about this later. So the next big step, also 1836, 1839, was the Anglo-French Postal Convention. And I have brought this map that maybe some of you are familiar with. And the Anglo-French Postal Convention basically said that the French and the British together set up a fast way of carrying postage from India and even from East Asia to Europe, namely France and England. And basically, there was a deviation of tasks. More or less, the British carried the mail from India to Suez. When it crossed through Egypt on a caravan, and when it was continued from Alexandria through Marseille, and then through France, either to France or to Britain. So every mail which went through this Anglo-French Convention, and this Anglo-French Convention also covered North America, it covered South America, yeah, went through both mail systems, yeah. So we had the British mail system, British packets from India to Suez, and we had French packets from Alexandria to Marseille, which nicely can be seen on these typical letters. This is written in Pondicherry. It has a boxed marking from Pondicherry. It went through Madras. It has markings from Madras. Yeah, it went through Bombay, and then it went through the Mediterranean Sea, and it finally arrived in Bordeaux. Yeah, so up here we have the British Postal Service. Down here we have a French Postal Service. Yeah, many auction houses, philatelists mix this up and say this is French mail. It's not French mail. It's mail under the Anglo-French Convention. Yeah, and this is very, very important to know. If you ever find such letters in an exhibit, yeah, you really have to check if the exhibitor gives all the descriptions, all the rates, the lines. It's kind of difficult to decipher because some of the letters went from Madras, some went through Bombay, some went through both destinations. But there are many letters which have not been carried under the Anglo-French Convention from Madras to Bombay, but by private forwarding agencies straight to Bombay, and then handed over to the British postal system. So the Madras cancels are missing. We only have the India cancellations from Bombay. So also here there's a huge source of mix-up and insecurities. Now let's go on and move into the year of 1853. Yeah, 1853 saw the opening of the French post office in French India. Yeah, and what is interesting is they opened and there has been no marking at all, except this one PD, which is practically paye or destination or paid to destination. Yeah. So you see this letter, you can see it was written in Pondicherry, 1854, and it has no marking at all referring to a British. Yeah. So it's impossible that it went through the British post office system. There's no British marking at all. If you look at this, we have a Paris marking and we have a marking from Suez, colonies françaises vers Suez, so French colonies through Suez. Yeah, no Pondicherry marking at all, but this marking, it's not very well readable. The PD marking, this originates from Pondicherry. Yeah. And again, this is something where we have seen a lot of mix-up, especially with this very early French mail, that people don't even realize that this is French mail. Yeah, so this is very, very interesting. And in German we call it unscheinbar. It's not a very beautiful letter, but it's very significant because it was from a very short period where the French had no stamps or hand-struck stamps at all. Very soon, by 1857, Hand-struck stamps were introduced, and I'm just showing the most important ones. Bureau de Pondicherry from Pondicherry. This stamp is an official French post office stamp. So most likely it was manufactured in Paris and shipped to India. We have this form of stamp for Pondicherry and Carical. The Pondicherry stamp came first. The Carical stamp, there was some time until it arrived in India. And the other places like Chandernagore or here Bureau de Poste, Carical, you can see they had individual stamps. Yeah. So this is an official stamp made in Paris or in France. These ones most likely were made locally. Yeah. And as you can see, both are very interesting. This already has a date line within the stamp. This has a manuscript date line. It's rare. And this Carical one is really, really, really rare. Yeah. We have none from Mahe and none from Jana or at that time. Yeah. So again here we have a little bit of a similar history as we had it with the British. As you remember, the British started with individual non-uniform hand-struck stamps, and the same thing repeats itself with the French. But many, many years later, it's over 65 years since the first post offices opened by the British. So, same year as the French opened their PO, the British introduced the first stamps. Yeah, and now this is for first adhesive stamps, because in English, like in German, we have two different words for a stamp to pay the postage and a stamp to cancel. In English, you have the same word, which makes it kind of difficult. But with the introduction of the one and the blue and the red Anna stamps, the first post office, these stamps were also used in the British post office in French India. At that time, as we all know, the British used those numeral stamps. So only if you know these numbers, you can tell if they are, like if you have loose stamps, you can tell if they were used in French India. If you have a letter like this, of course, you also can look up the letter. It's a folded letter. You can look up the letter inside. In the last couple of years, we have seen these letters with British stamps, very early British stamps used in French India, skyrocketing in prices. It's completely insane. But of course, if you have a collection on the postal history of French India on that time, you could not accept an exhibit without having at least the stamps with the numeral cancels. So it took until 1860 that the French introduced their first adhesive stamps for their post offices. Yeah, and what is interesting to know is, like, you have this stamp here. It's here, you cannot see it very well. It's called the Aigle Imperial, the Imperial Eagle. And this stamp was used in all French colonies. So this stamp was not specific to French India. It was used in all French colonies. And we saw a number of series of stamps, and we will see that later, which were issued for all French colonies at the same time. Yeah. So it took another more than 30 years until the first stamps were issued having an inscription French India on French stamps. So it's also important, if you look at these letters, the French call it colonies générales, or general issues for the colonies. These are all issued for all French colonies. Yeah. So this is actually the very earliest known one. These stamps were printed in France in the end of 1859, then shipped The exact date of arrival is not known, but most likely it was end of January 1860, and this is the very first known stamp from dateline 21st February 1860, and cancelled. It's not very well readable. 22nd February 1860. There are two letters existing. This is one of them. The earliest usage of stamps in French India by the French PO. So the question, and this is always important to know, why did the French issue their first stamps for the colonies in 1860? That's rather late, yeah? As you have seen, it's 6 years after the British, and it's almost 20 years after the first stamp was issued, yeah? So it was late, yeah? And why was that? There has been what the French would call a Guadeloupe experiment. Yeah, so the French had this island of Guadeloupe in the Caribbean, and in 18 in the 1850s, 1852, they introduced the use of French homeland stamps in Guadeloupe. Yeah, and this experiment became a disaster, yeah, from the view of the French authorities. There have been two problems. People just didn't understand the concept of stamps. And the second problem was that the stamps were not really available. So after around 6 or 8 months, the French dropped this experiment from Guadeloupe. There are 28 letters existing from that time, and it took them almost 10 years until they readdressed the issue of using stamps in the colonies. So let's move into some specialties. And we now really do a little bit of a deep dive into the French mail system in French India. One thing which is really nice is this correspondance d'armes, which is a military post. Yeah, and we see this very nice. We have this 25 centime stamp here. It's cancelled by the mute 91 dot cancellation from Pondicherry. We have a circular date stamp from Pondicherry, and this is like how it was done in these days. The obliteration was done with a mute cancellation, and we used the circular date stamp on the side, so it was very well readable. And this one, the postage rate was at that time for mail going to France was 80 centimes if it went through the French mail system, and it was 1 franc 20 if it went through the British mail system. So obviously the 25 centimes is much lower, and the 25 centimes is actually the domestic postage rate, and soldiers had the privilege to send mail at domestic rate. To indicate that, we have this octagonal cancellation stamp reading correspondance d'armes, so military correspondence from Pondicherry. These are rather rare, and this is a very nice and early letter with this correspondence d'armes. Also, very early in 1863, there were mailboxes introduced where you could put in your mail in the harbor of Pondicherry, and so these straight went on ships and never went through the post office in Pondicherry. It was a way of saving time. If you knew that the ship was sailing the next morning, you could throw in the letters the night before, and these letters were cancelled with a mute cancellation having this anchor here. Yeah, and these anchor cancellations were used on all French packet ships all around the world. So you can get them from East Asia, you can get them from South America, from Africa, from the Caribbean, and certainly here also from the French settlements in India. And the only way to distinguish that this letter originates from Pondicherry or the other colonies is by the name of the sender. So this is also something which is very interesting. They are also quite rare, especially in this case with this Eagle Imperial. It's a very nice letter. What also happened is, and we see this here, there was always the problem that there was a usage of French homeland stamps in French India. And I have brought two examples here. One example is this one, a letter originating from Pondicherry, also again in the 1970s. And if you look at that, I guess it's very hard to tell. This is a colonial stamp, yeah, and it doesn't even says colonies anymore, yeah. At that time, that was around the Franco-Prussian War. The French just didn't have time to make a new design. Like the Eagle Imperial read Colonies Françaises. There was no other stamp. But this is, by the design, it's a French homeland stamp, and they issued those stamps without dents. In France, were used with dents, exactly the same stamps, and for the colonies, they issued them without dents, and they were used. Yeah, and so now most interesting is this one is a colonial stamp, and this one is a French homeland stamp. Yeah, even though exactly the same Queen colony stamp existed, the color is different. Yeah. So this one has the color of a homeland stamp, so we have a mixed franking of a French stamp and a French colony stamp. And this one is also very nice. It's much later in the 1890s, but we have a full strip of French stamps, not colonial stamps, but French stamps used in French India. So this is something that happened. And basically, the reason why it happened is because the designs were identical or very similar, and because people have been carrying stamps around in their pockets, and they just put them on. Yeah, so this is something which is very interesting. By 1892, the first stamps were issued which had an inscription relating to the colony. So this reads Establishment d'Hollande, so French establishment in India. This, it says République Française, Colonies Post, yeah, and this is called the navigation and commerce, yeah. So we see navigation and commerce. I don't know who is what, yeah. I think this is navigation, this is commerce. Typical allegorical design. The French all had a long period of using these allegorical designs. And I brought you just this very small selections where about, I think, at least 25 different regions. So you can see the very same stamp has been issued all around French colonies of the second colonial empire. Yeah. So this is a very, very interesting issue. And what is very important to understand is that the history of this issue depends on the history governed by the French colonial ministry in Paris. These were the guys to say, we introduce those stamps. These were the guys who decided on the design. These are the guys who decided on the color. These are the guys who decided on changes of color. Yeah, so this is also very important. It's not that the color has been changed in French India. It has been changed in Paris and then introduced all around the colonies. What is very interesting is, and we have seen that before, discussed this before from the Guadeloupe experiment, there always have been periods where we had shortages of stamps. Stamps were always printed in France. Yeah, it's like no stamps do exist for French India which were printed in French India. They were always printed in France, and then they were shipped to French India. just the process of shipping took a long time. And so that what actually happened, that there was always at many points a shortage of stamp. The first big shortage of stamp occurred 1882, and I brought you 4 examples of paid in cash letters, and here even a postal card, which is very rare from that period. Yeah. So you can see some of them have this PD, the old PD cancellation, pay to destination. Here, here it's like written in by hand, but no PD. So there are different practices which have been used at that time. But this is very interesting if you have a postal history collection exhibit on French India from that period. You have to look that they are not missing these cash frankings. Later, stamps were getting short, and this is something which we can see all around French colonies. Huge amounts of multiple frankings of very low denomination. Yeah, so it seems that the 1 and 2 cent stamps have been readily available, by higher denominations have not been available as easy. And so we have this kind of what I would consider beautiful letters with large multiples, and these actually resulted from a lack and shortage of stamps. The next thing what happened is, and this is the only case of more or less a stamp produced locally, this is the 5 centime provisional stamp. In 1903, they took tax stamps, cut off the bottom half. Yeah, I forgot to show you a picture of the whole stamp, but the whole stamp originally was like this. And down here it had all the inscription. They cut it off, and then they had an overprint made locally in Pondicherry, in Français, post 5 centimes. Yeah, this is something which there are certain letters do exist, but it's like kind of rare, and this is the most exotic French India stamp, because of course the original tax stamp again was produced in France, but this overprint is unique, and it was produced in French India, and this was completely produced without any consent from the postal ministry in Paris. What also happened during that time were overprints, and on regular stamps I brought you 2 of those. Like here it's a 25 revalued to 10 cent, here's a 50 revalued to 40 centime. We have a whole set of those. Some of those stamps are really rare. Even mint, they are rare. Used on letters, they are more rare. It's like, I would say there's like about 20 of those kind of overprints that do exist. Lots and lots of forgeries. Yeah. So basically, if it's a more valuable stamp, you never accept it without a certificate. Yeah. If it's like cancelled like this, you maybe can say I can accept that, because it's for me it's obvious that it's not fake. Yeah. But if it's mint, it's like I would say minimum 50% of all stamps in existence are fake, are forgeries and fake. Now let's move to the next issue, and this so-called Prama issue from 1914 is the first individual stamp design that we can see for French India. So we can see, okay, about 20 years before the navigation commerce issue was issued with a standard design all throughout all French colonies, and the Prama design is the first individual design referring to French India. Still, we have to understand that this was not a decision done by French India, but the colonial ministry in Paris in these years decided to issue new definitive stamp series in all colonies with designs related to the colony. Yeah, this is very interesting, and you really should have a look at the British stamps. The British basically didn't do that until the British India airmail stamps another 10 years later. The French, they introduced designs locally, and I picked some of those around the world. As you can see, they want to show what the people in mainland France thought these colonies would be like. So if you look at that, and there's also books and academic work on that, these stamps are also considered propaganda stamps. Yeah, just by the design, because they wanted to show how a certain country looks like, in the same way how the ministerial propaganda would promote it to the people in France, and just trying to convince them that colonialism is a good thing. The next big thing are the Red Cross overprints. Yeah, this is a nice letter. You can see we have this Prama stamp, and we have 10 centimes as a stamp, and we have a 5-cent surcharge towards the Red Cross, making it a semi-postal stamp. And again, this is not something that just happened in French India, but this happened all around French colonies. Basically, what happened here, that the local French post office in Morocco did print the first stamp like this, and this was so successful that the other colonies followed. Yeah, and some of these colonies had professional locally print surcharges, and then issued surcharges printed centrally in Paris. In French India, as far as I know, they all were printed in Paris. Yeah, but if you look at this surcharge, it's always important again to understand this is not something which happened only in French India, but it was part of a French global initiative. Yeah, so we will find both stamps with a 5-cent surcharge all around the world. So the next thing which is interesting is to understand the relation of French and British postal services. And I will skip this slide. You will get all the slides so you can read it, yeah, later. Just to understand that, this is a letter from 1856. It was mailed from Mahe to Bordeaux. And so this is quite interesting. Even though Mahe had a French post office, these people used the British post office to send a letter to homeland Bordeaux. Yeah. So what was the reason why a French person in a French colony would use the British post office? Basically, there were two reasons. First reason was it was the faster way. Yeah. So most likely this letter had to go urgently from A to B, and basically every post office had its sailing schedule by that time, and in this case the writer considered sending it from the British post office cheaper. The second thing, of course, were rates. Yeah, and until French India used annas, at that time they used French centimes and francs, so the rates were different. Yeah, and that was another reason. So it's very interesting. Like most of these letters are part of known correspondences, and so you can find those correspondences, and you find maybe 10 letters through the French PO and 5 letters through the British PO, just showing that that people try to take advantage of whatever is best. One thing which probably is not very well known is airmail. Around the end of the 1920s, UPU introduced airmail as a regular form of sending. Of course, the British in India used airmail services, and until after the Second World War, the British did not allow the French PO to send mail by airmail. So by the beginning of the 1930s, pretty much all international business mail from French India went through the British PO, just for the very simple reason that the British PO offered airmail services. Yeah, and this is also something that we have to always understand, that there's a context. Yeah, why do no airmail letters exist from French India during that time, and why do so many letters originating in this case even from the government? You cannot see it, but it's a letter by the government. Yeah, to an address in France, then through the British postal system. Yeah, and the only reason is airmail. Very interesting is to understand how mails were delivered. Yeah, and here we have a registered letter originating from Yanaon, very rare, very small, sent to Paris through the French India post office. Yeah, it went to Paris. It was not delivered, yeah, refused, and it was returned. And as you can see, there has been a whole lot of different cancellations. That letter office in Bombay, that letter office in Madras, it went through several times. Smaller post offices by the British, and here we see ultimately a cancellation from the town of origin. In British, or in English, it's called Yanam. In French, it's called Yanaon. And what's really interesting is this letter went out by the French mail system, and this was returned through the British mail system, still down to Yanaon. And this is very, very typical, because the French, they never had, by this time, had anything but a post office. So they had a post office, collected the mail, cancelled the mail, put it in a bag, and handed over the bags to the British. So all the mail services were done by the British and not by the French. Also, local distribution was always done by the British. There never has been a local carrier system to distribute mail by the French. Okay, one thing that we also maybe know is that it could happen that French mail ended up in the British mail system because the British had set up mailboxes. The French never had any mailboxes. And so this is very nice, and this is probably the earliest known letter with a French stamp going only through the British post office system from Chandanagar. And I have another example here, which is much later, from Pondicherry, with an English stamp going through, but franked with the French stamp. Here we have the same. Here it was not accepted anymore. In the early days, I've never seen anything taxed in the early days. When by a certain time it was taxed. Here we see a text letter, which is very, very rare to see a text letter, and it has this Pondicherry due marking. I'll skip this and get to the end because I think this is very interesting. French India during the Second World War. Yeah. If we look at the Second World War again, French India was part of the French colonial system, and we as all know there were two Frances, or actually three Frances at that time. There was a France under German occupation, which is the north of France, including Paris. Then there was southern France under the so-called Vichy regime, which was actually a puppet and marionette regime under German control. Then there was France Libre, or Free France, under de Gaulle. So this is a map, and actually the different colonies, some of the colonies stayed with Free France, and some of his colonies stayed with Vichy France. What is most interesting is that French India from the beginning was part of Free France, so we said, yeah, we take up the cause of Mr. General de Gaulle, but by organization, yeah, French India was administered through Indochina, yeah, French Indochine, and French Indochine remained with the Vichy regime until the end. So this makes it very, very complicated, and ultimately, this resulted in the fact that during the Second World War, the French postal system ceased to work. Yeah, because there was no way that the French could go out because their superiors were part of Vichy and they were part of Front Libre. So during the Second World War, all mail, more or less, not like 1942 until 1944, all mail went through the British PO system. These letters are really, really fascinating, and we have seen like this is very, very nice from Pondicherry addressed to a French detachment in Syria, and we have this cancellation from Syria from the Free French military forces with the Croix de Lorraine. Very, very fascinating. Yeah, and so this, I will not go into this, but we have this, and actually during the Second World War, all mail went through the British system. Still, we have a lot of stamps, yeah, and we have these stamps. Basically, we have this France Libre with the Croix de Lorraine, and we have this one with a round circle, the Croix de Lorraine. This is something which we can see in most French colonies which were part of Free France, that these overprints were issued. Yeah? The thing is, these overprints, even though they are considered very rare, are 99% philatelic. They were issued to collect money from the philatelists, mainly in Britain, mainly in North America, to support the cause of Free France. Yeah, while these stamps were issued, they usually never have seen French India, and of course they have never been used there because there was no postal system running at that time. By 1944, postal system opened up, yeah, and so this is a very, very nice letter, and of course people try to use those things. I'm not sure if they ever have been officially sold in French India, but at least they were used. So we have a nice mixed franking here with the France Libre, and most obvious, this is not really, this is a regular used mail. Yeah, here's another example of such used mails. Yeah, starting by 1944. What we can see a lot, and this is something also dealers try to sell, especially to collectors in India, are purely philatelic letters. This is probably one of the most famous one, because once you read this name, Neil Kant, you know it's philatelic. He has been a dealer in Pondicherry. He has been dressing tons of mails like that. Arthur Maury, again, we know, was a big stamp dealer in Paris. So this is 100% philatelic. And also the rates, they don't fit. It's complete nonsense, more or less. But these letters are sold for outrageous prices. Yeah, this is another one by the second guy, Krishna Reddy, who was a stamp dealer, and like this one, it's not mine, fortunately, but I just picked it from eBay. It's like we tried to sell it in eBay for 700 francs, $700. It's completely insane and stupid, and you should never accept any kind of those things. And like if a collector has nothing else, and he really wants to show it, he should really write that it's complete nonsense. And of course, you never make a registered letter within the town of Pondicherry, which has been very small. Here's another example, here with a censor mark. For me, it's very questionable how this is done, and this is all philatelic. Yeah, this is also French philatelic. What is like very strange. Not sure how this happened. It's not good. The next thing that you should know, and I will finish in a few minutes, is the Vichy regime issued those two stamp series. Yeah, these were issued all throughout the colonies, and they are not, for me, they are pseudo stamps, because the Vichy regime never had any power on the French establishments in India. Yeah, and so these ones are even though you could read Pondicherry, yeah, but these ones have been manufactured, and they these stamps never reached it to India and never were used in India. Yeah, this is like basically a bogus stamp. This is a very nice stamp. This was issued in 1984, right at the end. The post office direction in Paris printed the stamp of this temple, but the temple of, I don't even know, Shinda Baram was not in French India. So before the stamp was even issued, it was declared invalid. Yeah, still it was sold to philatelists, so you can have this stamp, but it was never sold in French India. But of course, some dealers managed to produce some letters. So this is one of the few letters which was produced. And here the postal clerk wrote that the stamp is not valid. And in Tunisia, you got postage due stamps because it was not valid. Here's the second example. And here it's says here, I have not cancelled this stamp because it's not valid. Yeah, so this is rather interesting. Also very interesting, and probably the most rare cancellation of French India anyhow is this cancellation from 1950, Ville Libre de Chandernagore, Free Village of Chandernagore. I have no understanding why they said that, but it's a very rare cancellation. I don't have it. I've been trying to get one. So it's not owned by me, but it's a fascinating thing. As we all know, India became independent in August 1947. And what is really interesting, you have these J-Hind cancellations. And this J-Hind cancellation was even produced for Pondicherry, even though Pondicherry did not become independent at that time. But it's very interesting because the British, or in this case, of course, the Indians, the Indian Post Office, the new Indian Post Office produced these stamps for many cities. And so even Pondicherry, even though it was not part of a new independence, it exists. In 1954, French India became part of India, so the French rule ceased to exist, but you still find letters which relate to the French history, like this one from the French military representation in Pondicherry, sent to Algeria. At that time, it was still a French colony, through the Indian or new Indian mail system. So these things still do exist, and which is pretty much what marks the end. Okay, so if you're interested to get in contact with me, here you can find my email. And I also want to say, a couple of years ago, I wrote this book, which some of you might know, on the early postal history of India with all the different European powers until 1816. It's still available at the Museum of Monaco. You can go on the webpage and order it. It's 80 euros, and nice thing that includes the postage, so you don't have to pay extra high postage if you have it shipped to India. I will send the final set of slides to Pratisat so he can distribute them among you. Thank you. So you have any questions? I'm happy to take questions.
I am Aranyadatta Chaudhary. I belong to Kolkata, which is somewhere around 50 kilometers from Chandanagar, right? So
yeah, perfect.
So I actually, into war and war fund, stuff. So my question was to you is, this was 1914 French India stamps. I think the set of 6 values, which has some 5 and some Red Cross overprinted on it. And so was that meant to fund the war efforts, or it was for something else?
Oh, it was directed to the French Red Cross.
So which was kind of that particular time, there was a lot of money which was required for the French Red Cross, and that was the purpose.
So basically, these were the first semi-postal stamps of the world. Right. It's like we have these semi-postals, and nowadays we have them quite often. So there have been some semi-postals before, but this was like as I said, the Morocco post office issued that overprint locally, and it has such tremendous turnover, that basically many other colonies started to make local overprints, and later the French post office in Paris did it centrally with a better quality. So that was a huge, tremendous effort, and of course this was the starting point of getting the money out of philatelists' pockets. Because every philatelist worldwide bought these stamps, and it was very successful. Still, if you have such a stamp on letter, it's not cheap. It's a good value. It's not increasingly expensive, but a nice real used letter with a Red Cross surcharge on is always a nice thing.
So if I have a exhibit on the war efforts, of India during the World War I and II, so I can include them,
Definitely. Yeah. This is definitely something around the war efforts, and it's this is really a piece of history. Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
My name is Umesh. I have one small question. Just now you showed some stamps of Brahma.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Brahma temple in India is in Pushkar, if I'm not wrong, Rajasthan. So in what way French India was connected to Brahma?
This is the thing. It's what I was saying. All these stamps were designed in Paris. And I think this is a very, very good observation that you are doing. So these stamps were done with a Parisian view. So it basically was Parisian bureaucrats trying to make stamps to show what they think India looks like, French India. And they even picked a topic which is not related to French India, which is actually quite common. For example, there's another stamp showing a street with palm trees for French Congo, and in reality, it's not in French Congo, it's in Gabon. So they mix it up. It happened quite often. So this is something that you can even tell as a story, that these stamps originate from bureaucrats in Paris and not from people in India.
No, but in India, it is presumed that we have got 33 crores gods and goddesses. Why Brahma? That was my question.
It's because the guy it's like, I don't know, of course he was not an Indian guy, and of course he was not a Hindu guy. It was a Christian guy who decided on that, and basically maybe he has been going to the library and opened up the book and said it's Brahma. It's it's that's what I'm saying. This is you guys, you are in India, and this was colonial times. The people didn't care about you. Yeah, they cared about the people in France buying those stamps. Yeah, and for example, if you look at the one I showed from Guyana with this like a guy running around almost naked. Yeah, the people were not running around almost naked in Guyana at that time, but it's like it's really colonial. How do you call it in English? It's like it's like the bad perception of colonial countries. Yeah.
I'm Dr. Anjali Datta. I was born in Chandranagar. My family is from Chandranagar originally. And
Okay, very good.
I would like to comment about the Brahma stamp. What I know is that the French, more than the British, tried to imbibe Indian culture. See that temple stamp also, because the French people were interested in learning about Indian culture, and probably that is why they picked up some of the figures of gods and goddesses from India. I know that a lot of the French people who were there in Chandnagar all spoke Bangla. And there were a lot of Bengalis who spoke French.
No, it's like obviously the French were more interested in local culture than the British. Yeah, and you can see that by the stamps because until like the 1920s, all stamps always showed the British king or the queen, nothing else. And the French tried to avoid that. They didn't show after Napoleon III. They didn't show any emperor anymore. They said we don't do this anymore. Yeah, it's over now. We are republic. We don't show the president. We don't show nothing. Yeah, so of course this was a big step. And if you look, there's tons and tons of books that you can get if you go to Paris, and you go to this used book market. And you ask the people, can you show me a book about French India? You will find books about French India, like from the 1910s, 20s, with lots of images of people from there. So the French always have been fascinated with that culture, yeah? And you can see that they have been fascinated with that culture. Still, they did not understand the culture in full. Yeah, it's like we try to understand. So in the end, you cannot say the French have been bad people. They have been very interested, but they made these failures because they did not understand. And it's always important. The stamps and the stamp designs at any time originated from Paris. Yeah, it's like they were done in Paris by Paris bureaucrats. Yeah, but of course you can tell, and especially Chandranagore. Chandranagore is like still a name of dreams for French until today. Yeah, it's like there are songs about Chandranagore with like tea, perfume. We've seen this, yeah, and it's like I don't know if you know these Chandranagore chansons by the French from the 1960s. You should look them up in YouTube. It's really fascinating, yeah. That the French miss their old colonies and say we have been so beautiful, yeah, and so there was always the French always considered the colonies as a dream, and this was again part of the propaganda because they said if we have our colonies as something positive, it's good with the people. Yeah, I've been to London yesterday. And the British always considered the colonies under commerce aspect. The French not so much.
Hello, Eric. I'm Rajesh Pahadia. Going back to one of the slides in which there was this 1950 example of the cancellation, French cancellation. Can we go back to it? And or maybe can I have the translation? Did you said free Chandranagar? So what was the translation?
Ville Libre means free village of Chandranagore.
Okay. So does it also relates to an official announcement that the local, the French authorities in the Chandranagar, they allowed for a certain period for the local people to write in their address free Chandranagar. Because once they did announce the liberation of Chandranagar, but since that order was not passed in France with the right
I really,
authority, so there was
the thing is,
they
the
officially
thing is,
allowed, because we have examples in India of George sixth postcard. I have one example wherein the sender has properly written the sender's address with free Chandranagar as the
yeah,
address.
I really don't know. I really
And then I went
I,
to this Google and tried to search some information,
yeah.
and there I came across that there was a difference between the date of announcement of liberation and passing on the bill. And in that interim
But I think
period,
the thing is first of all, this is definitely a French cancellation. So at that time, it was not about freeing Chandanagore from French rule. Yeah. What we also know that Chandanagore played an important part for the Indian fight for freedom, because the Indian freedom fighters, once they came into Chandanagore, they were safe. Yeah,
yes,
so if they were followed by the British and they were able to come to Chandanagore, the French authorities just said, no, British, you cannot arrest an Indian freedom fighter. But I have no really background on that cancellation, even not by the dates. It was used for a very, very short time, and I consider it the most rare cancellation of French India, even though it is fairly modern. Yeah,
okay, thank you.
yeah. You're welcome.
Hello, I'm Dr. Sabu.
So,
I do collect Portuguese India. I have a
yeah.
cover from Goa to Lisbon, which has a small rubber stamp colonial Saint Melau. How is that it has gone into a French ship, or any French ship used to stop at any of the Indian ports?
It really depends on the time, yeah. But if it was mailed between 1837 and 1864, it definitely has gone under the French, the Anglo-French Convention. Yeah, so this convention of having British packets and French packets working together was between 1837 and around 1865, or no, 1882. Sorry. After that, I don't know. Yeah, and after that there were many different individual lines, but in the end you always would say there has been never a Portuguese line carrying mail from Portuguese India to Europe. It always went through the British system.
But the rubber stamp was Saint Melau, which is in France. But how come this letter has gone to France? Was it through French?
Because it went through a British ship, and then it went through a French ship, and after it reached Marseille, it was shipped to Portugal, most likely.
Yes,
Yeah. It's like what we did not have ships coming from Alexandria in Egypt going, let's say, to Porto or Lisbon. It wouldn't have been complete nonsense. Yeah. So usually the letters went to Marseille, and then they went through Continental Railroad down to Portugal.
No, my idea is the ship going to any of the Goan ports?
The French ships serve the Mediterranean. The British ships serve the Indian
Before going to the
Ocean.
Mediterranean, would they stop at the Goan ports?
Up where?
Did they stop at the Goan ports? Because this letter is from Goa to Lisbon. How is that letter?
Yeah, well, basically, what is most likely? It went from Goa to Bombay or Mumbai, from Mumbai to Suez, from Suez to Alexandria, from Alexandria to Marseille, and from Marseille to Lisbon.
Why is then Saint Melau is there? The stamp of Saint Melau. Colonies pass Saint Melau is cancelled over the cover.
Okay, so if it says colonies par Saint-Malo, it's really old. Yeah, of course. When it went through French ships, it went. If it's colonies par Saint-Malo, it went through the Cape, yeah, of Good Hope. It went around to Saint-Malo, and then it went on the continental lines to Portugal.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that must have been before 1837. Yeah, it's before that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. If it would have gone straight to Portugal, it would have the Portuguese couriers maritime cancellation. Yeah, you can see that if you have a book of the Barreiros, you should get the book of the Barreiros brothers. It all explains it.
Did it go to the French ship? That's what I wanted to know.
It was carried to Europe on a French ship, but but it was like it must have been really early letter. On the date of the letter, it's like if it's really an early letter, yes, it went through the French system. Yeah, it's possible. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dr. Eric, we have one last question from Markand. Markand would like to share the screen and then ask the question.
Yeah.
Hello, Eric. How are you?
Hello, Markand. Good to see you.
Nice to see you here. I'm sure we have discussed this cover earlier. So this is the front of the cover. This is the letter which we discussed from Bordeaux. And this is the back.
Yeah.
Back upon arrival, these two red stamps, I mean the 1 Anna, affixed in Pondicherry, got cancelled. It got the transit mark of Madras on the front. On the back, it has Coconada.
Yeah.
Now, what I want to understand, it is more sort of a discussion rather a question. We discussed this earlier. This cover has two Ingeram markings. In your presentation, you had described this and mentioned that the mails are incoming to Yangon. Ingeram was the British Exchange Office.
Exactly, yeah.
So why this cover has Ingeram paid and bearing, both of the thing? What I understand is that it is it has a bearing mark, Ingeram bearing 2 annas. If I rotate it, I think it would be more easier for you to understand. And so once the 2 annas has been paid during the delivery, this Ingeram paid has been applied? Yeah, this is finished now.
Yeah, this was applied during delivery, but it refers to the postage in front. There's no extra postage anymore.
Okay.
It's like this happens often that they confuse bearing and paid. Yeah.
Okay, so it's quite normal for Ingeram.
Yeah. But it's a marvelous piece. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very, very nice piece. Yeah. But especially like having the British stamps on, the Pondicherry marking, Ingeram marking, the receival mark from Concanada, and originating from Bordeaux. It's an amazing piece.
Yeah. It is very unusual and exclusive. You are right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much indeed, Eric.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eric Scherer, for the wonderful presentation. Personally, from the beginning, I felt the connect so much, I had to end up looking into what the connection is. And I found it, actually. The year 1978. Well, the connection is only as stupid as this. You started your first exhibition in 78, and I was only born in 78.
Okay.
So, I mean, it was a wonderful, timeline that you drew through from the handstock till the post-independence. The presentation was something very wonderful and very knowledgeable for us to take home. Thank you very much once again, actually, especially to aligning to the Indian timing and being there. It means a lot to all of us here. Once again, on behalf of the PCI and the Training Academy, we thank you wholeheartedly. Thank you very much.
All the best, and hopefully some of you will see each other in person sometime. There's plans that I will come to India.
Looking forward for your visit, sir.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All the best.